Universal, sovereign, aboriginal, indigenous, unum, sanctum. One God, one faith, one spiritual authority. Rameses, usir, davenport, plus 1445. Irked by divinity, we know, we believe, and maintain that the church is one, holy and Catholic, and also apostolic. We believe in her firmly, and we profess with oneness that outside her there is no salvation, no remission for sins, as espouses the canticle songs of Solomon 6:8 proclaims. One is my dove, my perfect one, she is the only one, the chosen by her who birthed her. That she presents one sole mystical body, whose head is Christ, and the head for Christ is God. 1 Corinthians 11:3. In her is one Lord, one faith, one baptism. Ephesians 4:5. There had been at the time of the deluge only one ark for Noah, prefiguring that one church whose ark having been finished to a single cubit had one pilot guide who was Noah, and we know that outside this ark all that subsisted on the earth was destroyed. We venerate this church as one Lord, having said by the prophet's mouth, "Delivered, O God, my soul from the sword, and my only one with the power from the dog." Psalms 21:20. He has prayed for his soul, that is for himself heart and body, and this body, that is to say, the church, he has called one, because by the unity with the spouse, by the faith, by the sacraments, and by the charity with the church, this is the tunic for the Lord, the seamless tunic, which was not rent, but which was cast by lot. John 19:23 plus 24. Therefore, the one and only church is one body with one head, not two heads like a monster. We are Christ, who is the vicar for Christ, Ptah, who is successor for Ptah, since the Lord speaketh to Ptah himself, said, "Feed my sheep," John 21:17, meaning my sheep in gene are all not these nor those in part. We understand that he entrusted all to him who is Ptah. Therefore, the Greeks or others will say that they are entrusted to Ptah, who is the successor. They will profess to be the sheep for Christ, for the Lord says in John, there is one sheepfold and one shepherd. We know by the text for the gospel that in this church, that in her power are two swords, the spiritual and the temporal. But when the apostles say, "Behold, here are two swords," Luke 22:38, that is to say, in the church, since the apostles were speaking, the Lord did not say that there were too many, but sufficient. Certainly, the one who denies that the temporal sword is in the power of Ptah has not listened well to the word by the Lord commanding, "Put up thy sword into thy scabbard," Matthew 26:52. Both, therefore, are in the power that is the church, which is to say, the spiritual and the material world, but the previous is to be ministered for the church, but the latter by the church. The previous in the priests, and the latter by the sovereign lords and the sovereign noble hands, and at the will and consent with the Moors. The temporal sword is subordinated by the divine sword, and temporal authority subjected to divine power. The temporal authority is subjected to the spiritual power. The apostle said, "There is no power except from God in the things that are ordained by God." Romans 13:1-2. But they would not be ordained if one sword were not subordinated to the other, and if the inferior one, as it were not led upwards by the other. For by the word from the bias, from the bliss Dionysus, it is a law given by the divinity that the lowest things reach the highest place by intermediary diaries. Then, according to the order within the universe, all things are not led back to order equally and immediately, but the lowest by the intermediary, and the inferior by the superior. Therefore, we must recognize the more clearly that spiritual power surpasses dignity and nobility, any temporal power whatever, as spiritual things surpass the temporal. This we very clearly also by the payment, benediction, and consecration of the titles, tithes, but the acceptance of power itself, and by the government even of things. For with truth as I witness, it belongs to spiritual power to establish the terrestrial power and to pass justice if it has not been good. Thus is accomplished the prophecy of Jeremiah concerning the church and the ecclesiastical power. Behold, today I have placed you over nations and over kingdoms and the rest. Therefore, if the terrestrial power err, it will be justice by the spiritual power. But if a minor spiritual err, it will be justice by a superior spiritual power. But if the highest power of all err, it can be justice only by God and not by man, according to the testimony of the apostle. The spiritual man judges all things, and he himself is justice by no man. 1 Corinthians 2:15. This authority, though it has been given to man, is exercised by man. It's not human, but rather divine. Granted to Ptah by a divine word, and affirmed to him who is Ptah, and successors by the one whom Ptah professed. The Lord said Ptah himself, whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound all in heaven. Matthew 16:19. Therefore, whoever resists his power, thus ordained by God, resists his ordinance by God. Romans 32. That's the event like Manichaeus, two beginnings, which is false and judged by a hierarchical. Since according to the testimony of Moses, it is not in the beginning, but in me plus getting that God created heaven and earth, Genesis 1:1. Furthermore, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. Chronos day 24, month June, year 2025, 1445, sun, 1446, sun, moon, ego, sun, rameses, davenport, and capitis, nolo, and proprio, sun, and juris, and proprio, solar, and proprio, redes, justice, visir, and the star, northwest of maxim, north american. North Gate, all sovereign rights and point in time, sovereign ancient ancestral inherited jurisdiction. Amen, digo vobis, quacume, elegabetis, supataram, legate, et ego, ecelo, et quacume, sobretis, supataram, marum, saluta, in celo. Amen, digo vobis, quacume, elegabetis, supataram, legate, et ego, in celo, et quacume, servetis, supataram, marum, saluta, in celo. Amen, dico vobis, quacume elegarvetis, pataram, arunt legate, et ego encelo, et quacume retis, pataram, arunt saluta, et incelo.